Welcome to Common Ground Discourse, everyone. We are your co-hosts. My name is Shane Swor.
God's peace. I am Brother Kenneth Hosley.
All right, this is our third installment on the topic of guns in our schools, and what we're looking at now is the moral damage of putting guns in the hands of teachers, and what does that really look like? So, what we're going to be discussing is the aftermath of the action, the consequences of now putting guns and this responsibility in the hands of those who are, at the end of the day, not trained killers. So, Kenneth, let's just open up with a question to you. All right, so let's put ourselves in this imaginary world. Hopefully, it remains imaginary. But you've been given a gun. You, among your peers and your colleagues, are more equipped, both mentally and given your limited training physically, to handle a gun. You're put in a situation where you have to decide to take a life. You know, let's talk about all these things. Even in the case that you end up firing and taking the life of a child or an adult who's entered the school. Let's look at all these things. What happens now that guns are the answer? What happens to the teachers?
Okay.
Is this perhaps a good direction to take that, or where would you like to start?
No, I think we need to look at the ramifications of this, because one of the issues that I don't hear discussed that much, and I've been reading so many articles about this, and I've seen a whopping 2 that actually deal with this, both articles come from veterans, military veterans who are in the best place to address this issue or relate it. And they talk about the same thing. It's the moral injury you do to the person that is being trained to be a killer. And from my perspective, not only as a teacher, but because of my background and training as a pastoral counselor, religious leader, working with veterans, living with veterans. One of our own brothers in the order is a veteran who shared so much of his experience with me. There's a part of this that I'm not hearing. And this picks up from our earlier segment about the romance or reality of guns as a solution. We have this romantic view of the great teacher standing there protecting their students, but we need to consider the ramifications of what that does to the teacher.
For sure.
And thus far, teachers have been, if I can use religious allusion, we have been the scapegoat for so much. This isn't going right. Students are failing. There's dysfunction in the school, dysfunction in the community. Let's blame the teachers for all of this. They should be doing better. Well, now we're moving from scapegoats where you just blame the teacher to now sacrifice. We are the lamb on the altar that you need to use so you feel better, without considering the damage you're doing to us. And I need us to address the moral injuries so that we do not become the new victims of your response. Not you specifically, but
sure.
Those that would want to arm teachers. So when we talk about moral injury, we need to consider what it takes to train someone to be a killer. And I'm using that term with all its connotation intentionally. They're not a protector. They will be a killer at the end. That's what they're being trained to do. When talking with Brother Jamie in our order, he is our Iraqi vet. One night he was explaining what it takes to be a soldier. The very intentional process where the government has to deprogram a person so that they dehumanize other people and objectify them. Because it is difficult for one human being to kill another human being. However, if you make that other human being an object, a faceless thing that is a threat to you, then in that objectification, you are now capable of being a killer. And you are more capable in that moment of pulling the trigger when you need to. But if you are torn by the human being, by your connection as a human being to the other human being, then you lose the chance. So it's intentional in reprogramming human beings to become soldiers. And outside of this conversation, the damage is when you bring that soldier back in and you haven't reprogrammed them to be citizens again. You have left them with that programming of objectifying others. And this is what you're now doing to a teacher. So to make it very black and white, my job as a teacher in an urban school, which is not an easy school, we have gang violence, we have Level 3 lockdowns, that's when when there is a gun on campus or a weapon on campus. We have these throughout the year. Not just the drills, but the real thing. I have walked out onto the bus lane in the afternoon being told by kids that there is a gun, there's a student with a gun outside. I know it's there, everyone knows it, my adrenaline's rushing, and my job is to walk out there and continue on with my job. When that instance happened, by the time as I was going out, our SROs, our security officers, had already found the students and were bringing them in. So we managed, but this is what we live in. Now you're going to take a teacher whose job it is to look at a student, a very difficult student, on a daily basis. We're supposed to see this student and find the best in them and then make them the best they can be later in life. Mm-hmm. Give me a problem student that acts up in class, that cusses me out, that starts fights on a regular basis, and I will find the frightened child inside that student so that I can nurture that child to become a better adult. That's my job.
But now, not to interrupt, but now it seems that if you put a tool or a responsibility in your hand, now that goal becomes blurred. Exactly. Now you're trying to look at mitigating risk. So your care, like for the sake of executing the program effectively, mm-hmm. you can't risk trying to help them.
Right.
Because now you're looking at a threat. Well, how do you balance that?
Well, that's just it's not a choice I make.
Sure.
I could choose to be in the program, but the training itself, the effect that training has on a teacher, this is the deprogram or the reprogramming.
Yeah.
Now when I was a teacher that walked in and saw a kid who was difficult and could be a physical threat to me, mm-hmm. my job was to find a solution that would save the kid, redeem the kid.
Right.
Now after that training, every time I walk into a classroom, I would have to look at every single student, and in the back of my mind, I am now thinking, you're a potential threat. Are you the one I'm going to have to kill? Are you the student I will have to shoot later on if it goes bad? That is now the constant question I will have for every student in my room and that I see in the hall. I can no longer objectively see them as something to build up and redeem. I have to mitigate that in my mind so I'm prepared to pull the trigger later on that you are now a threat, you are a potential threat, and you are a potential threat. Hmm. You have forced me to objectify my students, that I can no longer see them as young men and women that will be my future. I will see them as threats to my future that I have to be ready to eliminate. Mm-hmm. And that does moral injury to the individual. That does moral injury to the soldiers and the officers that go through this training. And now you're doing that with a teacher who, in the worst case scenario, they have to pull the trigger. But just as bad, imagine a teacher who spends 5-10 years of their life constantly going through training every single year to remember that one of your students can be a killer. Mm-hmm. And that every student you see, you now wonder, are you the killer? Are you the killer? And you are constantly emotionally preparing yourself to use lethal force.
This could lead to extreme cases of paranoia, mm-hmm. for example, unrest, and that, I think that also starts to detract from your ability to do your core job, mm-hmm. to be a teacher. Because now, I mean, what kind of sleep are you losing over this? And I think you've hit the nail on the head here, the desensitization towards how you view children now. Mm-hmm. So again, this arming teachers as a solution now that we're really putting it under the microscope seems to bleed into so many different problems, not just as what's on paper, not just what we can legislate, but now our citizens. Right. Who at that point, let's just imagine ourselves 20 years from now, this program's been rolled out. Who would want to sign up for that? At the pay scale?
Right. I mean, with the law in Florida, because just this week, Florida passed its law that it wants to create these, quote, marshals, 10 mm-hmm. teachers in every school. The reward is a one-time $500 stipend.
Yeah.
Plus you get to carry a gun. But your question, what teachers are going to do this, that's my bigger concern. Mm-hmm. The teacher that jumps up and does want to volunteer, that concerns me.
That's a red flag, isn't it?
That's a red flag, because if you are a teacher that is in an emotional state or psychological state that you are willing to jump up and grab a gun knowing that you're going to have to use that on a student, mm-hmm. I have bigger questions about why you're a teacher.
Yeah,
or
imagine
your capability as a teacher at the moment.
Imagine the white teacher at an all-black school.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the prejudices that go into that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how eager are you to... And again, I imagine rolling this program out, you're going to have a vetting process, right?
Sure.
But that's, again, you have all too many teachers volunteering. Now
Mm-hmm.
you have to assess what are their reasons. Right. And again, this folds into that program.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, there is, from the religious side, for, as a monk, there's a practice that we go through on death meditation.
Uh-huh.
That is where we meditate and contemplate our death and the eventual deaths of those around us, those we love. But the idea is that we familiarize ourselves with death, knowing our own impermanence. So that gives us our own humility. When it's our death because it will happen and we accept that, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the unique perspective here is that I know what death meditation does and how that's transformed me and my humility. You're teaching a teacher to think about death, but not the way we think about it. You're not teaching a teacher to think about death of themselves and that eventuality. You're trying to train a teacher to think about the death of their student that they have to cause.
Right.
And we are teachers. We are not killers. And again, don't call us security. We're not security officers. We're not law enforcement. We are not the shield that you want. We are not the Rambo that you will have in a class.
Mm-hmm.
When you are training these, don't call them marshals in your legislation. They are not law enforcement. They are teachers. And let's not call them anything that sounds so positive. You are training a teacher to be a killer. And that is not our job. And it is directly antithetical to what we do and make us capable as teachers that counsel and lift up students.
Yeah. So just for the sake of wrapping this up, being that we can't wrap up the entire argument here, but what we can say definitively is that should we decide to arm the schools or to increase defenses, we can say that arming teachers as an option is out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Well, we thank you for joining us for this conversation. We will continue this conversation in another segment. If you haven't caught our other two, there's a segment on student response as well as the romantic versus real view of what happens with arming teachers. And our next segment will deal with the feasible solutions or addressing what's really at the heart of this. We hope you've enjoyed what you've heard and engaging in our conversations here on Common Ground Discourse. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to us on YouTube.
You can also find us on Facebook under the same name, Common Ground Discourse. Please follow us on there, as we will be posting updates and other areas where you can find our content. Thank you.
God's peace.